Okay, it's 2 o'clock on Friday in the summer, and there is a USA World Cup game, but instead we're going to just do this. Or won't we? But yes, here it is. It's the space. I couldn't make it on Wednesday. I had lots of stuff to do. And we've got a lot of stuff that we're working on. Very excited about a lot of it. But I just thought I would open the space, see if anyone has any questions. You know, one thing I was thinking about doing was putting out this document about Free Samurai, and but it's not quite done yet, so I'll get to it later. Let's see. I think we should wait a little bit because I just put out the link. We'll see if we can get some more people in here. And this document about Free Samurai is part of my strategy because I've been a little disappointed with the fact that we haven't freed them yet. So I was like, oh, I have some idea. Now, of course, the bug bounty is in its second week. The first bug bounty went really well, and many bugs were found. In fact, mostly the tech team has been fixing these bugs. We haven't shipped as many new things, although one new thing that we are shipping is that we're adding silent payments and BIP47, which I think people will like. This is a pretty big deal because really we shouldn't have these addresses, you know. You should just be able to chat with someone and then just send money directly to their screen name. And, you know, we tried to get rid of, in Bitcoin, we tried to get rid of these addresses back like in 2014. All this stuff is very, very old. But we still don't, we still haven't succeeded in getting rid of these addresses, and we still have them around, and it's kind of a waste of time. I wanted to clarify something about the Solana token. Someone told me like, oh, since you're only rewarding the top 15, but something like half of that is owned by only 15 accounts. Someone mentioned that to me, but that doesn't matter. You see, if they only own half, then they only get half. So they have to buy the top 15 have to buy from everyone else at the end. So they still need as much as they can get. So it still has value for people who are not in the top 15. But people ask about that every other day, and it's a little disappointing because I don't think it's really that complicated. So like if the 50% of the market cap is owned by the top 15, then they only get 50% of the pool. So each coin in the Solana coin has value, whether it's in the top 15 or not. It's just the top 15 have to do that final step of actually redeeming. But it doesn't at all mean that if you're outside, then the coin doesn't have any value. So I don't know. I thought that was all perfectly clear and logical, but okay. Now, anyone want to come up and say anything? And we get Vlad up here as co-host. And we only have a few people. And of course, it is Friday afternoon in the summer. So
this space can be a bit more forward thinking in the sense that we spent the last month or so talking, basically answering to people's questions. But it would be interesting to talk about what's currently being planned and built for people who are enthusiastic about BIP300 and the fact that it's coming on eCash. And I think we have some very interesting action with the Elements Plus sidechain, which is going to have Opcode and CTV and pretty much everything else that the builders need. And this is much more than people need to make something even more advanced than the stuff that's already on Ethereum. And it's not a small deal. For the first time ever, there's going to be incentives to build this stuff, and people can actually prove themselves. And I do believe that if Bitcoin remains this deranged, but I'm starting to think that if Saylor gets liquidated, which seems like a possible outcome, maybe that Bitcoin will recover somehow and culturally rebuild, but that can take years. My point is that a lot of brain drain can happen to the Elements Plus sidechain and to a lot of the stuff that's being built right now. That's very interesting. And I know you've been part of the conversations, and I would be very interesting to know what you think about it and how you think, for example, it compares to Thunder, which is the other sidechain, which is going to have high throughput.
Yeah, the worst thing to happen to I think eCash suffered the worst blow ever, with everyone suddenly realizing that Michael Saylor is an idiot, which is, he's always been an idiot, but people didn't realize before. So now that people know that he is, there is a chance that BTC might be saved, which is terrible for eCash, but maybe good for the world. It's hard to tell. But as for Elements Plus, it's like, it's Blockstream has this Elements thing that they built a long time ago, and it has quite a few things. It has, not only does it have Opcat, but it also has like their weird add-ons. So it has like special tree signatures and all kinds of like special multi-sig stuff. Special opcodes have been re-enabled. So as you probably know, and as people listening probably know, just with a tiny little opcode, some of these people can do an awful lot of wizardry. You have like a Robin Linus or a Super Testnet or whatever. And, you know, sometimes they just need a little bit, like with Starkware, they just needed Opcat, which was just a tiny, tiny little thing that was in the original Bitcoin client. It's only 13 lines of code, and it's whatever, it's tiny opt-in ignorable soft fork, reversible soft fork, and it is this tiny, tiny, tiny thing. But with it, you can do like these Merkle trees, you can do all this stuff. So a lot of the builders tried very hard to, you know, like make stuff work on BTC. And I think this will draw, because this will, you know, how is someone like a Super Testnet, how are they going to react when there is, you know, something live with real money, which is this Elements Plus sidechain. So the new L2 sidechain. This would be like number 8, basically. Because it will actually let them do things. And I think, yeah, people will play around. That's what people really like, is the freedom. It's not about, like, people always think it's about, oh, how are you going to get developers? Are you going to hire developers? Are you going to, you know, that fundamentally misunderstands what kind of developers you would get. If you hire developers, you get the really low quality, bad developers who lie to you all the time about what's good or what's not. The real developers just, they want to make something, and they just need a couple little tools to build their cool thing. Now, how does it compare to Thunder? Yeah, Thunder has a lot of stuff stripped out of it so that it can be as efficient as possible, and it can just make transfer payments. It's interesting that recently there was a recent article from an Ethereum guy. I forget all their names. They'll send the same to me. But he was like, why Ethereum sucks, and I sold all my ETH or something. And that came out this week. And it was something like he was saying, well, actually, we built all this stuff like friend tech and blah, blah, blah. But the only thing people want to do is make payments. So that guy was kind of saying the opposite of what it's kind of funny. We got a lot of people saying the opposite of each other. You got like a Bitcoin Cash people who are saying, oh, we added Schnorr, and we added like all this stuff, like data processing stuff, so that you can bring DeFi over here. And then the Ethereum people are like, oh, payments was the only important thing. And then, so it's like kind of a kaleidoscope. But yeah, the point of the sidechain idea is that we'll try all these different things. Some of them will find users who pay transaction fees, and others will not. And that's perfectly healthy. And then the ones that don't will just die off. So that's exactly what we want. And of course, we want to be in a situation where whoever invests in the underlying coin they will be able to, when all the rubble clears, they will be able to use, whichever the most useful stuff that ended up surviving. So yeah, I don't know. How's that, Vlad? Did you get anything out of that answer?
Well, it's funny because every chain wants what they don't have. In the Bitcoin Cash world, they worked so much to build cash tokens and all of these. They added these opcodes to enable them to be more like Ethereum. And then Ethereum comes out saying, well, we wish we did payments better. It's almost like everyone's trying to capture another slice of the market that they don't have. And yeah, it's interesting because with drivechains, you can have everything for everyone on the same currency. You don't really have to go from one coin to the other. You only need to swap your coins across chains or wait for, I think it's 13,000 blocks for you to be able to withdraw and then just join whichever chain you think is more interesting for whatever it is that you want to do. But there is also a bit of an overlap, right? Because some of them have some of the same features, except that they have maybe different narratives. There's nothing that's going to stop people from making a lot of transactions on the Z side chain, which has privacy, and treating it just like Thunder, even if the fees get high. Like if they really find value in the privacy that they're getting, I can imagine that one having a high throughput also. But I remember, I don't remember exactly the context, but you said something interesting about the Namecoin sidechain, which I'm not remembering the name, if it's Bit Assets or BitNames. I think it's BitNames. And
BitNames, yes.
you could do some very cool stuff across multiple platforms and use that basically as your, in the same way that Ethereum people are using MetaMask, right? So that they can connect to all sorts of applications and have access to stuff that's way beyond the initial scope or what's really obvious about it, that you're just registering a domain. And it also reminds me of the early 2010s, I think, when you could log in. For example, you could create an account on Facebook with your Google account, and all you had to do was press one button that said log in with your Gmail or whatever. And you want to turn this bit assets into something similar, but across multiple ecosystems.
Yeah, for BitNames. I mean, I think BitNames, the idea is you would only own one name and the name would just do everything, and everything else would be like a subsidiary of that. So like it would be like you could log into Instagram or to TikTok or to whatever with just the name, and the name would, you would be able to chat with someone over a Telegram or over AOL Instant Messenger or whatever, and then they would be able to like send, and you'd also be able to send money. I think this will actually change the internet quite a bit. Now we've had some people join and come up and then say connecting and then drop down. So I'll just assume it's the excellent coding of this website, or I don't know why, but some people tried to come up and then they didn't. But yeah, okay. So BitNames, yeah, because the idea is actually quite a few things go wrong when you have to, like, you have people. You have people being impersonated, and then you have people having to like list, oh, here's all my other identities. Here's like my email, and here's like my Twitter, and then sometimes you can't get, so someone has already taken it, and so um, so let's see. Okay, we got JK. We'll see if he can come up without it crashing. It is distracting to work the menu, and then the menu has like terrible feedback. But so yeah, BitNames. The idea is like you just be talking, like, because this also is like then you have to request the address from someone. You have to say like, oh, okay, can you pay me $20? Okay, then you send the address and you got to paste it into something else. I think instead with BitNames you'd reunify everything. So yeah, BitNames. I wrote a piece. I guess I can post it. I don't really remember how to summon the nest, but there's like a nest of tweets. But I have some pretty ambitious plans for BitNames. I don't know if they work. This is like the third or fourth time that we tried to bring someone up, and then it like didn't work. So I don't know how it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it seems to work. If you can hear me.
Oh, nice, it worked. Okay, great. Okay, great. I hear you, but it's funny you don't show up as a speaker. Oh wait, now you do. I don't know. Well, welcome. You are now muted though.
Yeah, I was wondering, for the
Okay,
BitName.
great.
So, what do you think like a wallet looks like, which actively has it integrated as part of it? Like, is it just for the addresses, or how about like selling them or sending them around or claiming them? Is there any particular like workflow for that?
Yeah, it's very important that you bring that up because actually what I was thinking was we have to productize this to make it so that some normal person who doesn't own any crypto, they could just like pay $20 with a credit card and we'll just set up everything for them. We'll give them like the name, the private key or whatever. And we'll leave them with like $10 worth of stuff so they can play around and then what they would do ultimately when after they're comfortable with it is they would make their own wallet with like their own randomness. Like people are going to laugh, but I'm in favor of this whole deck of cards thing. Like you shuffle a deck of cards and you type in 30 cards and now you have a Bitcoin wallet. So they'd make their own thing and then they would buy their name back from themselves, for like $1 or whatever, but you transfer the name kind of like a domain. And so then this is how we onboard people quickly and we get them up and running. If we just say normal people, we onboard them into this whole experience, because I think actually people are very hungry for a new type of messenger. So obviously people have adopted AOL Instant Messenger. They adopted texting. They adopted Gmail. They adopted all this stuff. They adopted WhatsApp. They adopted Telegram. And I think people they now realize that, the world of spam, the world of impersonation, the world where all the messaging is a little too free, the world where they can seize your account or they close your account down. Nowadays, so many people have accounts that everyone kind of knows what it would be like. Oh, they locked me out of my account. Everyone is kind of, I think out of all the billions of people in the world, people are kind of warming up to the idea that they want a property right to their account, which is exactly what the blockchain does. So I think there's a solid opening for this. I'm not sure about it, but I think it's clearly better than a lot of what we have today. And if you read my post, I talk about how it would merge with ICANN and sort of eventually replace it while respecting everyone's property rights to the old ICANN names, like google.com or whatever. So if people read that, I have a section about how that would maybe play out,
There's one set of ideas, I suppose, proposed by Urbit in which you can sort of sell the namespace underneath your domain. I don't know if there's any way to integrate that type of functionality into BitNames.
Well, the BitNames idea is kind of it maps the human readable name to this computer readable, unique, scrambled codes and things and nested JSON and whatever. So once you're over there, you have a lot of flexibility where you can say, okay, when I look you up on BitNames, I'll find out, okay, I can look up whatever, Vlad, whatever on BitNames. But then what comes back could basically be anything because it would be all these, like how the domain name system has all these TXT records that are kind of arbitrary. And it also has the A records, which so you could just have all these different record types and you just look it up and just anything could be there. So it could be something that you sell or it could be, but yeah, I don't know about that. I think the key problem is that I want to have a right to a name that people can remember because there's too many, you need something unique. You know what I mean? There's only one Google, like google.com. The other thing is I think I'm not sure what people think of this, but the whole explosion of the TLDs, the top level domains. So you used to have .com, .net, .org, .edu, .gov, but now you have like a trillion. I'm not sure if that is great. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I think the idea is you want something you can like advertise, like google.com or just Google. And you want to be able to tell people, because there's like many hundreds of millions of people named Mohammed. People have the same name. And it's just confusing. Names are actually kind of tough. You want there to be a brand that you can invest in a brand. And then, so yeah, also with BitNames, we have like a phone number system where each name gets like a number, like an arbitrary number. So not only do you get a human readable name, but they all automatically come with a number. So it's like, oh, you meet someone in a bar, you get their number. And you get the number is like a super number because it just lets you look up whatever about the person, but everything is gated with, in order to make an intro to the person, you have to pay an introduction. You have to pay a fee to initiate the conversation. And then after that, you can just keep talking to them until they block you, and then you have to pay the fee again. But I think this is a much better, in the modern world, attention is scarce. In the old world, people were bored all the time. And so getting a letter from a friend was like the highlight of your week because you were just on the farm and you didn't even have light. You had to read read the letter by sunlight before the sun set. But in the modern day, we're being flooded with information. So we actually want to gate the information. And so charging for the intro is even better. Charging for like a cold intro is even better. And then
So I guess this is somewhat related, but like if you have like attached to, and I suppose this is how it would be used if you wanted to use your BitNames on another chain, like a side chain, would be just in that A list or whatever you get back from the BitNames DNS service, that it would then have listed there like some public address on one of the side chains. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, it would have like basically your BIP47 address in the case of BTC, like your reusable payment code or like your paynym, and it would have like the reusable Z address. All that stuff would be in BitNames. Right. So it'd all just be there.
And
that's the idea.
I guess at a minimum level, like if this is like I don't know, I suppose communication between chains or like resolving some sort of state between them, is that I suppose like a good usage of this thing that you've talked about of like when contracts attack? Is that going further than BitNames, and where does it kind of go wrong?
Okay, yeah, this is a very important. So like when contracts attack is when someone else uses the state created by something else in like because creating the state takes a lot of work. So if people build something that rely on the state being correct in the future, so like the Oracle idea is that like the Oracle relies on, when you're betting in the prediction market idea, you're hoping that it will be resolved accurately in the future. And the only way to do that is to be charging people for the, because there's an opportunity cost of honesty in the Oracle problem. So like every blockchain, I don't know if I'm making any sense with this, but it's like every blockchain has to like pump out errors, so like they all filter out like double spends and invalid transactions so that when you see, oh, this is in the blockchain, you have some assurance that it means something. So then you can rely on it. So then you have a problem of free riding. And free riding can be okay, and it can be beneficial, and it can be efficient. But there are cases when it cannot. So what you need is to, okay.
Just that. I don't know what the analogy would be for free riding in terms of like a BitNames or something like that. And is that maybe why it works?
No, it might be fine because the idea I was getting at with when contracts attack is if one contract, let's say you have one sidechain that's minding its own business, and it produces like $10 million a month in transaction fees. So it's 10 million a month in transaction fee. This is the happy sidechain. Okay, we'll call it sidechain number 3, just for fun. And then you have sidechain number 4, and sidechain number 4 does something that interferes with sidechain 3 and causes it to die. So in a way, that's the assumption, is that sometimes you have the interference. Now, the claim that I make is when sidechain 4 does that, it's going to kill off 3, and then it will kill off itself also, because it was a parasite. So its final destination, it was born at 0 and it will die at 0. You know, from dust they were made, to dust they shall return. And so that was kind of the point of that, is that some of these harmful contracts, they are self-defeating because, you know, they kill the goose that lays the golden egg, and then they can't be a parasite anymore. So the argument that I made was that actually miners would just say, they would try to hunt all those down. If they're unsuccessful, then it doesn't matter because sidechain 4 is doomed anyway. All that matters is sidechain 3, will sidechain 3 be killed? So the idea is a defensive wall around sidechain 3. That's the when contracts attack. That's what it tries to be. I realize it's a very tortured argument, but I had a lot of fun making those slides.
I do see the problem that could be presented in like a similar thing. I don't know, maybe if the analogy of how Lightning is stealing fees from the main chain. Is that at all accurate? Is there like...
I think of an example. Okay, an example would be actually the world is better off with like one naming system. So if you started up a second naming system, like let's say that everyone owns jk.bit in BitNames, but then someone starts up a BitNames 2, and then they claim jk.bit for themselves, and then people start up like a BitNames 3, a BitNames 4, and then now there's like 8 naming sidechains.
Okay, I see.
Well, now you can see that this kind of would like threaten to maybe kill all of them. So the miners might say, okay, listen, 2 through 8 you're not allowed to be, or 1 through only 5, only number 6 is allowed to be, because it's kind of like how if you go to court, one thing that courts provide is just finality, where sure you can appeal sometimes, but like you go to small claims court, you and your neighbor have been fighting over something, you think he tripped over your whatever lawn flamingo and broke it, and he says he doesn't know what you're talking about, and you think he's lying, and you have like some pictures, so you think you go to court, and it's kind of like they decide, and it's like then you just move on with your life. But then until then, it's kind of an open question, like what should I do about this? I feel I've been wronged. The other person thinks you're just harassing them. So the courts provide that kind of finality. It's kind of like, a similar example. This is a favorite example of Tom Schelling. He has this example about people screwed up in a bunch of cars at an intersection have achieved gridlock, and they're actually all trapped there, and they can't get out because they're all surrounded by other trapped cars. So now they don't know what to do. The police officer shows up. Now, even if the police officer starts ordering people around, you move back, you go over here, they undo the gridlock. Now, even if you're the last car to leave the gridlock, you're still better off as a result of the police officer just overriding everyone, starting ordering everyone around, because in the gridlock, you're trapped there. And so not every situation is like this, but I think it's a similar example where it's kind of like, okay, listen, the miners step in and they just say, listen, we're going to kill off all these. So you have interference among the chains. So that is one that would apply to BitNames if they say, okay, we're going to try to
I see.
We're going to try to half copy this one or something, or copy 99% and then change it. And we're going to copy everything except google.com. And then we're going to put all the money we saved into a marketing budget, and then everyone might just be like, okay, we gotta just shut all this off because it's annoying.
Yeah, I guess like if you have some way to have a contract resolve that same dispute like before the miners need to, then I guess if it's like specifiable, I don't know for the example of like domain names, whether or not that is easily calculatable other than through maybe like a market on Truthcoin. in order to have some contract like on a another chain rely on that. But I guess that kind of runs into the same problem itself of that. But I don't know if that explained anything. I guess.
Well, one part of my argument was that if since the system was set up so that it would eventually kick off the parasitic chains, part of the argument I made was that because of that fact, maybe no one would ever bother making a parasitic chain, or even, in the first place, maybe. I don't know. It's funny though. I have these long theoretical arguments from like 2015, but then a lot of them end up happening, like in Ethereum and stuff. Like we end up seeing them play out. And there's a quote from John Maynard Keynes about practical men who think they're above theories are the slaves of some defunct economist or something, which is it's a funny quote.
It's a very Keynesian quote, but yeah, no, I don't know if you could maybe solve it by having some sort of like I suppose bond that you post.
Solve what?
Solve the problem.
Solve like which
multiple
one should win?
Like that.
Well, I think it kind of solves itself. You are right, though. That quote is a classic because Keynes would write these long run-on sentences. He was kind of a terrible writer, no offense. I mean, he was this British style sometimes of these like, oh my God, it's torturous to read. John Maynard Keynes is really hard, as I had to back in my scholastic. But yeah, he sure knew how to fill up a paragraph with like one sentence, and that quote is no exception. But I think the idea is this: the idea is the miners they want to maximize their fee revenue. So it's kind of like any other business or any other situation. Like they kind of have an incentive. They know how much money they're already getting all the time, and they know they have some idea of how much they're going to get. Like they have some idea of like who the customers are. Everyone's paying these fees. And so they would kind of have some idea, I would think. It's not like you'd start up two BitNames like at around exactly the same time. And it's like a shotgun start and then like a photo finish, or not a shotgun start, but you know what I mean? It's like, so then it's like an exact tie for a period of like 2 or 3 weeks. I don't think that's very likely, right?
No.
I think they would like, okay, there's one that people kind of like, and it was kind of here first. And, but there could be a lot of drama, as there often is in the real world. There will be these gray areas. But that's what I was bringing up about the closure. It's kind of like, well, they'll just decide, and then the one side will just fold, and they'll say, well, listen. I think that's healthy.
In order to prevent that, I don't know if there would be a way of paying miners in order to not allow specific other side chains to be created unless they pay.
But remember, you don't need to, because they don't want. Because think about it: if everyone just shows up and they decide, oh, this BitNames thing doesn't work because there's 8 different BitNames, then the transaction fee revenues will be falling automatically. So the miners already have the incentive to proactively or reactively or whatever, the miners are already, because of merge mining, they get all this money. So they already want all the money they can get. That's their goal, is grab all the money. So the last thing they want is for there to be like all these people paying customers and then, something interfering with that.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, we don't want that.
I see that there wouldn't be any necessary reason, I suppose, to have multiple, except when I suppose there is like some conflict at some point in the future, maybe between like people trying to resolve their dispute, which, then I guess the idea that miners can resolve them, I think is reasonable, assuming that it's, worth it for their time and, to generate it, which BIP 301 makes it such that even if it's not, they still get paid regardless, I guess. But yeah, I don't necessarily see that there's an issue. I think more so I was thinking of emulating like something in which you intentionally wanted multiple, just so that people had their own like domain that they could control. I don't know, the names within it, in a way that is also resolved by the miners in something other than DNS, like that's I suppose what Urbit was trying to do. And I don't know, not that it's necessarily like the most important.
Yeah, we shouldn't necessarily follow the Urbit example too, because it kind of didn't succeed, although it was very interesting. So I don't know if that I don't know if that means that we should.
I know. I don't think it is for something like DNS. I think that's a failure. I think the only possible time it could be useful is if you have some sort of a very particular networking stack that you must pay people in order to run, like something like Tor. Then I think it's a good system for paying out distributions to nodes that way. But it requires.
I worked out this really clever way of getting Tor to work, like because the problem with Tor is that it's communist, and everyone's just doing it for free. And I wrote it all down on a piece of paper somewhere, and I think I know where the piece of paper is. I'm not sure, but part of it was okay. You had to solve a couple different things. Like one of the idea was you could pay people. You would pay people to forward your traffic. But one part of my idea was also that you would test it by you would sending some packets to yourself, and you could audit them. And so in that way, you could audit the people who are forwarding the packets, since it's also anonymous. They don't know which packets are real, and that was like part of the solution. No, I don't know what happens to a piece of paper.
The first thing I suppose that I imagine is that people don't like paying for traffic, which is obviously like I think what Urbit started from, that assessment, and like looked at like Facebook and all these things and then tried to build from there, wherein the solution they decided is you just have like moderators effectively, who can cut off like more specifically this particular route is like a cause of like spam traffic. I'm just going to like relegate it to that. And then I don't know, that it's yet to be seen if it would be successful, that type of description of a network and the spam on it, because obviously paying for it is just the easiest way to get around it. But regardless, I don't know, it's just something I was thinking of. And I think the whole thing attaching it to drivechains was just that if you were able to pay a miner to say only allow X amount of chains that are similar to this, that would be equivalent to the stars or whatever they have on Urbit, where you allocate a certain amount and then they control that. But I don't know that necessarily. It's a bit of a tortured metaphor, but yeah.
Okay. Curtis is also up, so I don't know if you want to ask or comment on anything, but if you do, feel free. If not, then don't.
The only other idea, I don't know if
I think another part of this, of the VPN thing, was of like, okay, everyone's a VPN basically. That's like the Tor thing. It's like everyone's a VPN, and you would all collect. So like everyone would run it because everyone would earn money. It's like you would just leave it on all day. You'd be part of the thing, and so that was another piece of the puzzle. But I had all these puzzle pieces worked out somehow. Would it have actually worked in practice? I don't know. Because, but yeah, I think it's a very neat, like, okay, obviously the way it has to work. Okay, so the way it must work is because you need it to be fast. That's the problem with Tor and I2P and whatever. So it has to be lightning fast. So the only way to make that work is to make it cost some money. And I had this thing worked out. You'd purchase like credits from people, and then you would redeem the credits for having your packets forwarded, and then you could test if they were actually working. So I don't remember all the. I gotta find it somewhere.
No, I mean, I definitely think a network like that.
But whatever.
A network like that would probably function better in terms of like latency and speed and actual forwarding of the packets. But a lot of times,
so yeah, you'd have to pay to use it, but you'd be getting paid because you'd be getting paid. You'd be out.
Back in the day, I would pay for Tor. Back in 2011 and 12, it was so so slow and so it was incredibly slow. So I'm sure there'd be a market for that. I mean, a lot of people would pay to get a little bit of speed or a little continuity, or not dropping so much. So I don't know what it is today, but I'm assuming it's still the same as it was in 2011.
Yeah, and I would think that the type of people there's a couple people using Tor, right? There's like this communist class of like people just kind of tinkering around and having fun, and then there's like people who really, really need it, and it's like of course they'll pay, and it wouldn't really be that much. It would just be like, your home internet already costs like $50 to $100 a month, and then this would be like you'd have to offset it, because when you're using it, you would pay, but then when you're not using it, it would pay you. you would be out walking your dog, and it would be like earning money for you because you're forwarding people's traffic. So I don't know how much the net cost would be, but it would be, it wouldn't be that much. But the problem with Tor is that it doesn't cost. Anyway. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts, or we can continue, or Vlad, any other stuff? New stuff coming out. There's lots of new stuff coming out. But there's so much that we need Vlad to tell us what we should talk about.
I'll be selfish this time and just discuss this idea that I had last night. I was talking to someone named Rocket on Telegram, and he told me, at first I was very skeptical. I was like, oh, it's so stupid. It's just gimmicky. But it makes sense, right? Right now, the largest IPO in the history of humankind is SpaceX. And maybe that, since we have the technology to build a sidechain for everything out there, maybe we should make like a Mars sidechain, which it serves the purpose of intermediating payments between Mars and the Earth. Of course, it's not very doable with the current block times, because depending on the distance between Earth and Mars, sending a message from Earth to Mars can take anywhere from, I think, 8 to 22 minutes, depending on the distance at that moment. So receiving a message can take just as much, which means that if you want to build something that's reasonably fast, you need at least 30 minutes block times to be able to send and receive a message, but can be very cool. And this actually leads into the conversation of, why would a Mars colony or whatever want to use Earth money? But I do believe that this can be like the settlement layer. So Mars can have their own form of cash or whatever. They can have
I like this idea.
instant finality on their planet. But on the other hand, they want to do commerce with Earth, and they want to pay for stuff, maybe content, maybe software, maybe something that can be transferred at some point with a future shipping or whatever. So maybe that we can have a sidechain that's called Mars or whatever, and can intermediate these payments between Earth and Mars. But what it requires is longer block times and maybe some features that might be desirable for this sort of settlement. Of course, it's gimmicky, it's very ahead of its time. But on the other hand, it's very forward thinking and proves that this is a long-term project and might also get the attention of Elon, and also dunks on Blockstream's satellite idea,
Well, I think it is.
Okay.
If I could also propose another topic, something I was thinking of a
Yeah.
while ago was
Okay, but let me first talk about that though, because I think we could just do one at a time. And it is fun, obviously, and I appreciate the creativity of it. But I think there's a temptation, like this is like when Ethereum was getting started up, and they're like, oh yeah, we can have a smart contract for everything. You can have a smart contract where you can pass a car on the highway. And I don't know, I just think so. For example, you can increase the block time without a sidechain. Like you can just say that you'll pay, like for example, you just say you broadcast the payment from, like think about it like this. You need to, they want to buy, bottles of water from Earth because there's not enough water on Mars. So they would make the transaction and then they'd send it to you. And then it takes 22 minutes to get here. And then you say, okay, great. And then it takes a long time, takes a day to get 144 confirmations. And then next day you broadcast it back. So it takes 1 day plus 22 minutes to go all the way back over there. But then they get a message on Mars that says, oh, it has 144 confirmations. So they know that it has a lot of confirmations. So they kind of know it was received by Earth and included in a block. And that works if they're buying or selling. So yeah, even though that is a fun idea, I think it's great that people have all these ideas. I really do. But I do want to pour a little bit of cold water on, you don't need a drive chain for slower blocks, or even you can just use the Bitcoin 10-minute blocks and you can just have more, basically wait for more confirmations if you want to manually slow it down. So I don't want everyone to lose their head and just start proposing like whatever, a drive chain for like that's what they have, like, this is like what happened in the early Ethereum days. They were like, oh yeah, we could have like, smart contracts for the provenance of art, or, they had all these like half-baked ideas. I think if we attracted Elon's attention with that idea, he would not be impressed. He would just think like, what are these people talking about? Because it takes like a very long time for the stuff to, you could maybe have something where someone on Earth pays someone on Mars to do something, where they say, okay, I'll pay you to pick up that rock over there and take it with you, and then bring it back to me on Earth. But again, the fact that it takes so long for the rock to even come back. I don't know. I'm not sure. I just wanted to say that's a neat idea, but probably not in the cards. Or JK was going to say something.
Yeah, there were just one idea, I suppose, and then there's a second idea for like doing DeFi stuff. But the main one that I thought about quite a bit ago and then didn't really do anything with, because of the, I guess, lack of tooling in Bitcoin, was that if you could have an auction where you have some rule enforced by a contract that the highest bid always wins, then you can sort of like have some other person who bids on the result of the auction, kind of creating like a covered option type of thing. Anyway, I don't know. I guess the idea of just like, I assume most scripting languages would just be able to enforce that invariant that you could encode the result of an auction where the highest bidder always wins, and then do something like that. But I guess in general, I'm just asking about like scripting, and do you think that the way that the whole crypto economy has, revolved around smart contracts is sort of the correct way, or do you think it should be more like each chain is specific to just one activity?
Well, I think a bigger problem is that the Ethereum people, I don't think they actually knew a lot about what they wanted to achieve. Like I brought up that example just a moment ago of like, they were like, oh yeah, in the future, everything will be a smart contract, and you have a smart contract that will like, you'll be driving on the highway and your car will be able to make an Ethereum, whatever, and pay the other car. Now, if you think about it, of course, you could actually have done that with Bitcoin also. You could have said like, or with Venmo or whatever, there's just, the cars could just need a way to talk to each other, and then they could say, hey, listen, I'll tip you $5 if you just get out of the way, or whatever it is. None of that really had anything to do with Ethereum. So I think overall they were just really, really, really confused and naive in general. And I don't think it had anything to do with like, because part of the premise of your question is like, oh, did they set it up the right way, or should it have been set up like version A or version B? And it was kind of like, I think they just had no idea what they were doing overall, and there's just wishful thinking. The wishful thinking is the most powerful drug. And unfortunately, the wishful thinking leads people to think, oh, we've got it all figured out over here. And then people become complacent and overconfident. And I think that's exactly what we have seen in just about every chain, especially BTC. But yeah, people think, oh, this is the only thing we need. And then they lose that hunger in them to just keep testing things against reality. Where Ethereum did well is they had a few things like ERC20 and basically USDT payments. So that was like what they kind of had. So, and they were interested in like, how can we get more transaction fees up to an extent. So that was so they had some things going for them. But yeah, I think my guess is that when Ethereum piled everything into one system, that had a lot of disadvantages, which included that the fee rate, like some of the rates on Ethereum, would crowd everything else out, and then it encouraged like copycats, where you'd have like Solana or whatever, Avalanche, or all this stuff was just like it was just the same EVM, but with more space. So then Ethereum got into like a tug of war with those. So yeah, I don't know, but actually, my honest opinion is that overall, in all the years I saw Ethereum exist, I was never really impressed. Like usually, if they had a good idea, they were like taking it from someone else, and they're not really understanding it. And they were very young, and I don't think they were great designers or great like product market fit people or great like user experience people actually. So that's my arrogant opinion, I guess. But they didn't really have a great product. Yeah.
No, I just think that you do allow yourself a lot more flexibility when the code you write is only ran on a node and not on every user's device who wants to validate some aspect of the transaction.
One advantage of having them topical is that you can take it more of advantage of the state. So like for BitNames, you could say, oh, hey, we have a giant list now of everyone's name, and you can prevent double spending of the names, which you can't do if you put it on top of. So like if you wanted to do that with something like ordinals or counterparty or something, it would be rejected by the ordinals or counterparty node as a double name, but it would still make it into a Bitcoin as a Bitcoin transaction. So then the state isn't as efficient because you basically need the second state because the states contradict. And so that's an advantage of having the state be topical. So that was always my suspicion, is that the topical ones would win. They have more efficient state, and they just have like they kind of have a little network effect of their own, where you're on the chain with the other people who care about whatever domains, or they care about
how do they
assets.
contradict
So, yeah.
there? I don't know if you could explain a little bit.
Well, because imagine that you do it two different ways. Okay, one way is you build something where you go to the L2, and the L2 has one place where you can look up the names. You could look them up like alphabetically, because there's like a UTXO, like a U tree XO, or like a rate. There's like a tree. You're a tree by name. So you can look them up like alphabetically without having to look up the whole thing. So if I wanted to look up Curtis, I could go to like CURTIS, and then I can look up the thing. That's efficient. Otherwise, I have to download the whole thing, which that could also be fine. Now that's option number one. But then option number two is you do something that's a little more like counterparty, and you say, okay, here's what we do. When you make a Bitcoin transaction and it has a zero valued op return, this already wastes 8 bytes, but then you got to do the op return part. Then you have to have the payload. The payload will say, like, this is a counterparty message. I am registering the name Curtis. So this is all in the op return, which is ignored by BTC. So that's the second way of doing it. Now that way actually has a lot of advantages. One is you don't need like L2 drive chain universe. You could do that today if people were doing that. But one disadvantage is now you have the whole second counterparty node. Now you were talking about where does the state contradict? Now imagine someone then puts more op return stuff. They don't even realize they're putting new op return messages in that they don't even know anything about counterparty. But it happens to be the case that their messages is also interpreted as, oh, I want to register. This is a counterparty message, and I want to register Curtis. It will be accepted by the BTC network. So when you look up the UTXO set, it will be part of the state. When you look up, which transactions have been included, it'll be part of the BTC state. And when you look up the the counterparty world, this is hypothetical. I'm describing something that's kind of similar to counterparty, but not. But the idea is it's an extra op return. When you look up that, this will be inside the counterparty universe, but it'll say this was an attempted double spend of the name. And so it will reject that. But you don't know. Now that when you can no longer do some kind of like SPV type thing, because if someone just points to you, oh, I registered Curtis, you don't know if it's a true one or a fake one without downloading all of everything. Because mere inclusion in the BTC doesn't necessarily mean it was. So you didn't pump out any contradictions.
Okay, so that would prevent you from using something like BTC or like some other chain in order to enforce a rule set on your own system.
Yeah, we want the rules enforced. So the question is, because that's the whole reason we have the blockchain in the first place, because you need a zone where all the double spends are forbidden. So you have a zone where all the double spends are forbidden. And that's kind of like saying, it's like your refrigerator is a zone where all of the hot molecules have been kicked out. That's kind of an oversimplification, obviously. But you know what I mean. And it's doing all this work to fight out all the double spends and the invalid transactions.
I suppose, can you maybe just, you don't need to, but like, just like that as being described as like state, it seems like maybe it's like some sort of data or something like that. Like, I don't know if never mind.
Yeah, like imagine the unspent transaction outputs, the UTXO set. You know that there's something that everything in that set has in common.
Okay,
which is that they're all unspent, they're all outputs. But actually, that's not true for the op return that are also like Namecoin, like counterparty registrar. That's not true. You just see a bunch of op returns. Some of them could contradict each other in some higher system, or maybe they all just have no meaning, or some could be invalid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because BTC doesn't know any of that. So one could say, oh, I want to buy the name Curtis from you. So now we're in an unfortunate situation where either we don't know what anything means, and so it all means nothing, or we're kind of like going down the line to try to figure out, see, the whole blockchain idea is kind of like you want to have a global state. Yeah. That's like the whole point.
Yeah, as I understand it, I suppose the state would describe how you want it sorted, this particular data in some database, like, which column does it go into, which, whatever, something like that.
Yeah, if there's a double spend, which one comes first, thus making it real, and the other one comes second, which puts it in a completely different category of being not having actually happened.
Hi, Paul and Vlad.
Yes, we got Justin here.
Chat with you guys.
Yes, always.
How's it going?
Hello.
Doing well?
It's going pretty well, I think. Summer in the Northern Hemisphere.
Glad to hear. And congratulations on the eCash. I didn't have a chance to tell you yet over voice.
Thank you.
At least, yeah. Very exciting stuff. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Oh, well, welcome to the dark side. I'll start with that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I'm glad you finally come over to the side of the S-coiners.
Yeah, the impatient maybe, or the high the people with high standards.
Yes, and I think a competitive mindset to win. And actually, something that I found, the thing that jumps out, I was looking at your post about it actually, that you have pinned to your profile. Something that really, the merge mining. So like the different drive chains or the different you're referring to them L2s here, right? But they're these different L2s.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, these different L2s, if they merge mined, these different drive chains, right? If they merge mined, isn't that closer to sharding? Like in a sense, because then and if that's enforced by the actual L1 protocol in that case. And I suppose that's what I was wondering, first of all. I thought that was very interesting.
Isn't it closer to what? I didn't hear what you said.
Well, I thought, is my audio okay? Or Okay.
I just cut out that one part.
Okay, all good. I was wondering if it was closer to sharding.
If they're all merge mined,
yeah, like is it if it's because if the L1 hasn't been changed, then like how is that enforced? So what I was wondering is like how closely is the L2 linked to the L1? Is it enshrined, as they would say in Ethereum land, or based?
well, so there is a thing for BIP 301. There are some ways that the L1 block would reject someone who's basically, they say that they're merge mining something, but they're actually not. The original merge mining is not, like there's nothing that, this is a very counterintuitive fact about merge mining, which is that if Bitcoin wanted to stop Namecoin from being merge mined with Bitcoin, there's nothing that Bitcoin could do about that. And Namecoin could just continue to be.
Well, there's something the miners could do about it, though, right? That the
Yes,
collective
right,
coordination ends up being the problem if you have too many of them, right?
It's true that but it's kind of the miners are the ones being paid extra. So it's a kind of funny scenario, because usually in Bitcoin people talk about like things that you could do, like a soft fork you could activate, and then the miners would have to like conform to this new filtering or something like that. But in this case, there is no thing that, yeah. In the case of merge mining as a whole.
Right, but
in this case, the blind merge mining is just a kind of a variant of that. It's very, very similar.
Yeah. Okay.
The idea with merge mining, of course, is that they get more money, so they don't even care.
Right. There's the incentive. I was wondering, like, because in my view, I think it's better if you tightly enshrine it, like tightly wind it into the L1, and then it stops being an L2, like an enshrined rollup, right? I don't even consider that an L2 anymore. That becomes like part of the L1, right? But you can't do that if you can't touch the L1 code, right? Like that I don't understand that part of eCash.
Well, yeah, if you enshrine it, you have the data. The whole point of, I think, keeping the block size small is the data availability problem, which is that for all the data that in the chain, like all the enshrined data, everyone has to store and save and process and validate and then serve it back. So the whole point of the L2s, to some extent, or a big major point, is that some people want to do different things. So some people they wouldn't want the L2 to be enshrined, because then they're responsible for it.
Right, but then you have things like admin keys, and then or the alternative is you're actually just subdividing what is already a small security budget, right? Instead of just having one unified chain. I mean, this is the modular versus monolithic debate 10 years later, right?
Well, yeah, but I've always been in favor of the merge mined L2s, so that does combine it to some extent. So it's modular, but also recombined.
But that's what I mean.
L1 minus, yeah.
That's what I mean. This reminds me of like an L2 enshrined blockchain, which I'll be like, well, actually, that's just sharding now, which is more monolithic. Like the snake is eating its own tail, or as you're correctly.
Well, I don't know what, like when sharding came out like after I had published about DriveChain, and I published DriveChain in November 2015, which was after Blockstream had published about Sidechains. And so I was never really sure like exactly what they were getting at with the sharding. It seemed as though that if you wanted to do sharding the right way, then you would have to just do DriveChain basically, because there was no other sidechain idea around. So to me, that DriveChain idea works just fine. And then there's maybe a long list of vocab words that have like altered it slightly.
Not changed the code.
And that's fine.
You're forking it anyway. Like there's so many limitations now because of the L1. Like you could change it to a 1 minute block time and a 32 megabyte block size. I mean, the chain would be so much more capable for it, and it helped the L2s too.
Well, I disagree with that. I think you really want to keep the L1 as similar to Bitcoin Core as possible, so that there's no comparison whatsoever between the two.
So there's
And
no
I don't think it
what,
really
sorry?
limits it. There's
Comparison?
no you don't want because if they're different, then it's two people arguing. You have to, one says, oh well, it's got this, and then one says, well, is that better or worse? And if they're
Better.
lay people, then they don't know.
No, it's better.
That's the thing about every change, some of them are good, some of them are bad, and it's hard to know in advance which is which, and then it's very hard to keep explaining it.
It's faster, cheaper with more capacity. Long runs means more fees, which means more security, which means more decentralization, depending on your economic design,
Yeah,
other
I don't
things.
think the fast block times are better, personally.
You don't.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so either.
I don't.
Really? Do you not like?
Yeah.
So there's certain use cases, such as a lot of things in DeFi, so like DEX exchanges and perp exchanges, and that's where like the majority of fees are coming from now in crypto.
Well, I suppose
right?
for like the DEXs, like in terms of speed, I don't think that there's anything that will ever be faster than like a centralized exchange order book or something like that. So I don't think you're necessarily like competing and having like a comparative advantage there.
Well, we're touching it. We're getting very close now, and there's ways to actually have advantages over those markets as well, which is how we have billions of dollars of revenue every year, right? From these dexes, and I feel like if you don't have speed, those use cases don't become as attractive there, right?
I personally think that the fast block time is a kind of clumsy way of getting speed. There are lots of other ways that I think are much better. For example, you could have a situation where people basically stake. They stake and then they have to wait for an hour or so for it to be like fully confirmed. But then once it's all staked, then they can just instantly update. I think that's way better.
That's better than a
In general,
confirmation time.
No, it'll be sub-second after it's set up. But then you still have the benefits of the 10-minute block time.
What's the benefit of a 10-minute block time?
Well, one is SPV is much, SPV is only 4 megabytes per year, whereas with the much faster block time, it becomes proportionally less efficient. So if you're going to hang all of your hopes on SPV, then certainly you want the block time to be as slow as possible.
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that before. As in like SPV wallets, I assume you mean.
Yeah, because the SPV wallets need all the headers. So the headers are 80 bytes in BTC. So there's 80 bytes, and there's only 144 blocks a day, or 1,000 blocks a week, 52,000 blocks a year. So that's very, very manageable for like 10, 15 years of block history.
Wait,
it's
hold on.
like
4 megabytes a year, did you say?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not much, right?
Right. That's not much with 10-minute blocks. But if you scale it up to sub-second block times, then you just scaled it up by like a factor of 600.
Is it not based on the number of transactions? It's based on the number of. Oh, of course, the block header says based on the number of blocks. Okay,
yeah.
Sure. No,
but there's a little bit more to it than that. Like
in the case of Bitcoin, that's why I said 1 minute, not sub-second, because the architecture doesn't really allow for that, right? But like, there are other chains that have like minute, 2.5 minute block times. There isn't really any problems there. The amounts that you're describing don't really seem that crazy for most modern phones and etc. And also, like, eventually you just prune it as well, right? Like an SPV wallet doesn't need to go through the entire history itself. Right?
I think it would for the headers. Yes, pruning is for the block contents, but everyone needs the headers.
But of the entire history.
Yeah, but the headers are only the headers include 0 transactions already, so the headers are just the starting point.
Yeah.
But I suppose you could say something like, I only want the headers for like the last year or like the last.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
How do you know that they are? Because think about it, when you download the software has basically the Genesis block with it. and then it says this is how we go into the future. So you could have like checkpointing and stuff. But I think there's a bigger answer to the question of why not change Bitcoin Core, which is that overall, I would prefer this project to be very agnostic on, people's beliefs. So I would rather say, some people say this X is better than Y. And I just like to say we have X and we also have Y.
But you can't.
So
you can't.
we
Like,
can't
build
have
the
X if we change it from Bitcoin Core, because then it won't be Bitcoin Core anymore. So the L1 has to be totally ironclad and rigid in its commitment to copying Bitcoin Core, so that no one can ever say, well, hey, it has this, it's like Bitcoin Core, but it has this change, which is a disadvantage.
Okay, well,
So
why does it have to be like Bitcoin Core? Because Bitcoin Core, from my perspective,
people
is
like
terrible.
Bitcoin Core.
To be the opposite of Bitcoin Core, Paul. Isn't that the lesson
No, but
of all of this history?
because when I protect people's right to Bitcoin Core, that's the same as my protecting their right to a large block size L2. I'm protecting people's right to form their own opinion.
I'm not debating your right to do what you want and the people that want to follow you and doing what you want and to create this fork. I'm going to be the last one. I'm going to be the one that's going to defend your right on this one, Paul. 100%. I've been here before a few times now.
But you assert that the smaller block size is objectively better.
A smaller block time.
I say, oh yeah, right, exactly. Smaller, shorter interblock time. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
You assert that that's objectively better.
Well,
and I say that this is like a menu and people can order a la carte. If they want to order the escargot, then they can. If they want to order vanilla ice cream, then they can order that too. I'm not going to try to turn the vanilla ice cream to snails or something.
No, I also love the free market like you, but I think it's more about what you're choosing to support and what you think is good. And it's also a funny thing if we're comparing smaller, faster block times, and we're comparing that to the wanting to be like Core for a what do I describe that as, a ideological reason?
Well, I think it's a product that people have bought. I mean, Bitcoin Core is still number one, and it's more than four times bigger than Ethereum, the number two coin. So this is by far and above. It's not like a weird, obscure. It's not like we're catering to some weird tastes. This is the mainstream thing that most people want.
Well, but it's not where most of the usage is, right? It's not where most of the value and revenue is in crypto. That's long since moved on, right?
Well, I think all the revenue is really small, in my opinion. So like, there's something like in the hundreds of billions of dollars, so almost $1 trillion in transaction fee revenue across every payment mechanism. It's kind of hard because some of them, it's really, really hard to add them up and standardize them because they don't make any sense. Because like WeChat Pay is like inherently subsidized by the Chinese Communist Party, like being able to know everything about you. So it's like a sort of half free and then blah, blah, blah. But
as long as the CCP remains there. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can be cheaper than WeChat Pay is free, but you don't pay with money. You pay with, your autonomy. So actually, it is expensive in a way that when it would be more than 10 cents. Yeah, you pay with your soul. It's like that, the Rick and Morty episode. You don't pay with money. Oh, you pay with the curses. But point is that it's basically $1 trillion per year if you do back of the envelope math. And so even, Ethereum, which is like the leader, this is like a millionth of like a billionth of a percent.
Ethereum's not
obviously
the leader anymore. It's Solana and Hyperliquid right now are really generating a lot. But yeah.
But yeah, you know what I mean. Is that we're not this is all early days for everything. So I think it's true that what happened was BTC formed a weird irrational cult where they started hating on all users, and then Ethereum found some other users, and that's good. And we should also want.
And then Ethereum started to hate on users, and then they went to Solana.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Precisely. Yes. Yeah. I completely agree. That's exactly what I think happened. Well, they didn't. They recognized that there is the data availability problem is real, so they realized that it's a problem more users comes with more costs. So they realized that actually we could kill off the whole project if we let the users run rampant. So there's some logic to it. But the smart thing to do was to partition all these into optional L2s so that they're all run like businesses or like hedge funds where like they could fail and they would only affect the people. The failure would only affect the people on them. So then you say, the sky's the limit, and you can make your Solana chain, or you can make your weird chain, and your chain can have 10-second blocks, or it can have 5,000 blocks every millionth of a second, or you can do whatever else you want to do. And
from my perspective, we just watched that fail on Ethereum, right? I mean, Vitalik even admitted it recently. It was like, yeah, this is a failure. It's been terrible. So
this being fun, that was a little vague. What specifically?
The L2 scaling roadmap has been a failure. Now they've pivoted over to the EVM roadmap, which in my opinion is also terrible. Yeah. But how's
I don't know that anymore. I used to know a lot more about Ethereum's L2 picture like in 2016. And then I stopped paying attention. But this is kind of, sometimes I find this has happened to me in my life a few times where I like write something down and then people implement a terrible version of it, but they make all these changes, but it still has the same name. And then they're like, then people come back to me and they say, well, hey, how do you know this is going to work? And I was like, well, they didn't do what I wrote down in the first place. This has happened to me multiple times in my life, actually. Some of them but so I don't know what Ethereum did with the L2s, but hey, were they set up so that were they all merge mined so that the L1 Ethereum miners got paid all of the money, all the transaction fees collected on, somehow I doubt it. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe you can tell me that it was.
No,
because if it is, then,
which is why this is interesting, because they kind of said the free market.
You mean that I was correct, so that they did not do it?
Yeah, that's right.
Could I just clarify? Yeah, right. So they didn't do it. They didn't do it what I said. And then they had chaos as a result.
Exactly. And they've been talking about doing it for like the last 10 years, and they think maybe they'll do it in 5 years from now or whatever. But like it's yeah, so like
this is what I think we should do the whole time. Yeah, merge mining is a form. Satoshi invented merge mining. I had blind merge mining, and the advantage of blind merge mining is that it preemptively addressed what later in Ethereum was called MEV. I preemptively addressed all this in like 2016, 2015. I was like, you want to make it so that when they mine the block, they're compensated for all forms, and then the L1 miners don't have to see or know about anything happening on the L2. And so I've kind of like separated all these concerns, like, preemptively. And so, yeah, my claim is that blind merge mining preemptively, which was invented in January 2017. This is what people have said also, is they said actually they have something that they call proposer builder separation. But if you look at it, it's basically just blind merge mining. So, and that's exactly what blind merge mining is. It's the whole point of it being blind is that the L1 miner is just grinding the SHA-256 hash, and they are not looking at what they would call is the proposer builder. So that's what I called I had different words for it, but I actually came up with it all first. And again, I came up with this whole drive chain thing before sharding.
Well, the interesting thing about PBS, proposer builder separation, is as far as we've observed, it seems to, like, at scale, when there's a lot of usage, it seems to just occur organically. There's separation, and then it becomes better for the protocol itself to enshrine it to avoid things like MEV, which can be, exploitative in some circumstances, and there's another word for that. Let's just say not overall beneficial.
But you're talking about like the roll-ups and things like that would be using that, correct?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
You're talking about like roll-ups and things like that when you're talking about L2s that would be using it, correct?
Yes.
Because I think that there might be some aspects of that design which caused like problems itself.
No, like L2s are generally terrible, but actually the Ethereum itself and Solana have also seen this happen actually at a massive scale, which was very interesting to observe. But actually L2s are the worst because they usually just have a single sequencer, and then the sequencer just gets to the side, right? Go ahead.
I suppose
all this, but this is another thing where it was like, okay, then Blockstream came up with Liquid or whatever, where it was just like all the fees. Liquid, like all the fee revenue goes to Blockstream, and it's just like 15 keys, this multi-sig thing. So then I was kind of like, none of this has anything to do with the original sidechain idea at all, which is that it's this own blockchain. It's kind of like saying, yeah, we took the blockchain part and we deleted all the blockchain parts. We deleted all the proof of work. We deleted all anyone can join and leave the mining network anytime. We deleted all the full nodes where everyone's an equal participant in the peer-to-peer network.
The
We
fees
deleted
go back to the
everything.
L1? The fees go back to the L1 in this case?
I'm talking in Liquid, they didn't do this at all. Liquid is not merge mined because actually it's hard coded in Liquid. I'm talking about for Blockstream's Liquid.
No,
they hard coded it so that
I was wondering for these drive chains. Like
Yes.
the fees would still go to whoever creates the drive chain, no? Except for the incentive.
No. They go down to the L1.
All of it?
No, they go down to the L1 miners. Yeah, 100%.
But then how is that
There is a tiny
enforced
wiggle
if it's
room.
not
This is
tightly
fully
bound?
misunderstood.
But how's it enforced?
Well, unfortunately, this is like misunderstood because there's like a tiny wiggle room parameter, and all kinds of people like have misunderstood this for so long, and it's really not that complicated. But the wiggle room parameters basically accounts for like what you might call negative MEV, because I just have the whole thing rolled up into one transaction. So I say basically, okay, but the way blind merge mining works, maybe you'll understand it, is that there's like a slot on L1 in each block. So like sidechain number 3, you put like a hash there. So like every block, there's like a special spot. There's like a special real estate. And so whatever hash you put there, that counts as being the L2 block that meets their version of the difficulty requirement. Now, it could be invalid. It could be invalid on L2, but L1 doesn't care. And then the idea is people on L2, they build the block paying themselves the transaction fee in the L2 Coinbase, but without the missing puzzle piece in L1, their block will never be valid. So they go onto L1 and they pay with L1 coins. They pay them to make a special transaction. This is BIP 301. They make a special transaction to the miner and they say, listen, I'll give you $5,000 worth of coins on L1 right now if you add this cash to the Coinbase.
Okay, I got it.
And that includes all the transaction fee value on the L2, and it also includes any MEV benefit on the L2.
Wait, it includes all of the. No, I thought before you said it went back to the operator.
Who's the operator?
Sorry, I forgot the exact term you used. There's
a bunch of L2 nodes that are all equal, and they each have different wallets. So they would kind of like 4 or 5 of them would be out of 100 or maybe whatever. They would each construct because everyone has the block, everyone has the mempool. So they would each throw their hat in the ring. They would make a block paying themselves the fees in the L2 Coinbase.
Okay.
But they would get any MEV benefit. Now they would be bidding it up in L1. These would be like bids. So they say, I'll pay 5,000. I'll pay 5,005. I'll pay 5,006. And only one of them makes it in. Only one of them can be included on L1. This is what BIP 301 does.
Okay, but it sounds to me like you're describing like a separate bidding, kind of a fee market system, right? In order to get
in a way, yeah, because they're in a different
for the merge.
Sorry, it rolls up. It's kind of to reuse the roll up word.
Sure.
It says all the L2, each L2 transaction that comes in, that kind of increments the bid over in L1. I mean, it should in theory, but now, of course, I included a thing where they could have like a little tip of money for themselves to compensate them for their trouble, because if they get exactly 0,
but it doesn't sound. But is that an argument from economic incentives, or is it enforced within the protocol?
It's an argument from economic incentives, because it's basically like this: the L2 block is worth a certain amount to the people running the nodes.
Okay, but
like if they say, hey, if I find this block. See, here's the thing: is because it's actually the economic incentives are way, way better than having it be enforced in some kind of math equation.
But it's based. But I'm going to have to challenge the assumption, because it's all based on the assumption then that all based on the assumption that sorry, I lost my train of thought right there. Sorry, just go ahead.
Okay, I will just continue with my train of thought, which luckily I can still remember, which is that the block, okay, the L2 block could be worth like $5,000 worth of transaction fees, but it also may be worth a certain amount of MEV, like $300 worth of MEV.
Oh,
But
sorry,
running the L2 node might be very expensive, so that might be might want to subtract a little bit because it'd say, hey, I hate that I have to keep running this L2 node every day. So you may want to subtract a little, and then you might say, well, hey, listen, this block might be orphaned, or there might be a block maturity period. So honestly, there's like a lot of factors that go into it, and they might, after they combine all these factors, like subjectively in their mind, they might say, you know what? Okay, I'm only willing to bid $4,900 for this block on L1. And so in a way, it's perfect because everything washes out perfectly in my conception of it. Whereas people trying to equationify everything, they always end up being unable to get it. So
I
remember
remember
the
actually,
thought.
and it's great because you actually just already gave the arguments what I was going to ask. So I wanted to challenge the assumption of that all of the fees will go into the block for the miners.
That's exactly right. They may not, but if they don't, it's because of some real reason, right?
And because it's open ended, right? Because anyone can become one of those.
Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly.
Would they use stake for that mechanism?
They need to have L1 coins to bid, and they collect L2 coins. So if you call that staking, then yes, but I wouldn't call it staking per se. But you're right that they have to already have liquid cash. They have to already have money to do it. So.
Interesting. Okay, well, that is staking. You can use it for different things, though. Okay. Okay.
Because the L1 coins are slightly superior. L1 to L2 basically instantly and perfectly with no issues. Yeah. But coming back from the L2 to L1 is inconvenient. So is in that sense, it's kind of like you have to have the better coin. That's yet another reason though is why you would not want it to be tightly coupled with like the equation. Is that the L1 and the L2 coins, one might be worth like 99% of the other or some other percent. So this actually, it works out great because whoever is most able to jump all the hurdles, they'll pay, the L1 coins and the miners will just be thinking, this is just one transaction we include in one L1 block and we're getting like $5,000 for this every block or whatever it is.
But
this is great. So it set it all up just fine.
Sorry, but if someone were to say create an L2, and it'd be like that has some sort of Turing complete VM in there, like EVM or SVM or move language or something like that. They could just program that part of the fee revenue goes back to them, right? And that it's not part of the bidding pool, so to speak, in order to send back to the
anything that's not part of the bidding pool.
Sorry.
So like think about it like this. The block is like worth a certain amount, but this includes all the MEV, includes the transaction fees. And then the block is also, it takes a certain amount of work to make. You have to run the L2 node. You have to deal with the block maturity, 100 block maturity period, and you have to maybe withdraw the coins from L2 to L1. So it's a big combination of things. Now, if you're saying that on the L2, someone is going to program something that makes the L2 block worth less, then either it's just worth less for everyone or it's only worth less for you, in which case your bid is not going to be as high.
But look from this
and you will win.
If they're like a big perp exchange and they're making millions of dollars a day, right? And then they're like, okay, we're going to program off to go part of the founding company. And then they can help that to scale operations or whatever. And then you could potentially program anything with these kind of value flows within those type of virtual machines, right?
Yeah, as I understand it, it just is dependent on the miners still generating enough in fee revenue to not just like make a copy of it in which they are paid the full amount.
Right.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to stop people from competing with the blockchain itself. So there could always be someone who says, hey, here is my fully custodial exchange. I charge my own fees, which are low, and I have instant everything. we can't do anything about that. So we wouldn't be able to stop those fees from getting leached off that way. And I think this is part of the, it's funny you bring that up, because I think this is part of the annoying thing with the MEV conversation, is that these people in BTC have produced this unmeetable list of completely absurd criteria that it's almost laughable, like if you just write it all down. They want it to be like, the perfect system doesn't leach any fees from L1, but it doesn't add any fees back either, because this is like affecting mining incentives, close quote. But we are allowed to do all this merge mining, and you're allowed to do, like, if you have like heating a swimming pool, then that's kind of allowed. Or if you're drying the persimmons, that's it's sort of allowed. So they've constructed this absurd list of what they consider to be like valid ways of paying miners more money or not. And I think they have not even the faintest clue how absurd it really is. But it's certain things where there's like demand, you're allowed to do these Texas demand management credits, and of course the difficulty is allowed to adjust up and down, which affects mining costs and profits enormously. So it's so I think it's very funny that this reminds me of that, because it's like, okay, well, what if people just stop using the L2 for whatever reason? And it's like, we're really not responsible for that. It's like, all we're trying to say is
anyone can
we've got
build
an
an
L2,
L2, right? And like, if there's an incentive for them to be able to change the rules in that way, right, then that will happen. And that's one of the lessons in Ethereum, right? It was the whole power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely none. Like if you look at like the top 20, not a single one has removed their admin key, not one. Pretty wild.
Well, yeah, I think the admin key is a crazy advantage of the blockchain system. I don't even know. I have no idea if Satoshi foresaw this, or if there's some kind of like inherent connection. I don't really know how it works. But basically, you can upgrade via the soft fork. I'm not even sure if Satoshi realized this at the time or something, but this fact, and the fact that the drivechain L2s, they're also blockchains, and you could also upgrade them with soft fork. I mean, I think you're honestly screwed, because just about every other thing requires the admin key or something admin key like, and like for this Stark verifier, you like can't change the version, and the same for like RGB. You are like stuck with, it has to be like perfect, and it includes no bugs. Whereas in the blockchain model, where you can usually just soft fork out any bug and just say that type of thing is banned henceforth. And so it's really wild how completely overpowered the blockchain model is. And now the admin key, of course, the admin keys are terrible because they've re-centralized everything.
These admin keys are only on L2s, right? Like the L1s, Ethereum, Solana, Hyperliquid, they don't have admin keys, right? Because they're L1. They're based on a consensus, just like based on.
This is why I hate all these other people. Are like, oh, what about these L2s over here? But it's like, if it's an admin key, then to me, it's not. It's already fully custodial, in my opinion. Anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting gray area, right? Like people don't treat them like they're fully custodial, because people have their own keys and they can withdraw at any point. But the catch is also they can steal all user funds at any point as well. And through the sequencer, they can also censor too.
Yeah. So you see, but that's exactly what mining is supposed to prevent in Bitcoin.
No, that's not fair. But proof of stake achieves the same thing, right? We can agree on that, right, Paul?
Yeah, I'm saying that the reason why the drive chain is the actual L2 is because none of those flaws. It doesn't have any of those flaws.
Well, a L2 could have actually an L2 could be based on proof of stake, right? You could have an L2 with a drive chain eCash L2 based on proof of stake, right? I think it would make a lot of sense to do that.
You could have a L2 where the deposits and the withdrawals are BIP 300, and then the L2 is itself blind merge mined with BIP 301. So that's blind merge mining. So that's not proof of stake. But on that L2, you could have people stake basically, and now you have basically created like an L3 chain that could be like perfectly proof of stake, and that could have instant.
Wait.
block times, and in fact, that could have all kinds of crazy things.
Why
You
would it have
could do
to
whatever you want.
be why would it have to be the L3? Why can't you do that for the L2? I missed that.
Well, because you need to know. Well, I mean, I think you could technically, but I'm not sure if you would want to, because you need to know the
I
deposit.
definitely
You
want
need to
to.
have some
Hold
way
on.
of
I
knowing
definitely
the
want
deposits and what's going.
to.
Well, okay, sure. I think you need some way of knowing which coins have been deposited and withdrawn successfully, and you need some way. It is possible to have a drive chain that does not use blind merge mining and that is itself 100% custodial. But I mean, you just kind of lose a lot of the benefits. It's kind of like at that point, because you might as well just run a fully custodial. If you're not using blind merge mining to advance the blocks, right? Then it's kind of like, well, then how is it any different from just saying, send me all of your coins and then I'll send them back, I promise. So it's kind of like a little confusing at that point. But people could
Well,
people
because there's
could do
still
it.
incentive involved, right? You just replace the proof of stake with that, right? And you can still just send the rewards back to the L1. You just have the L1, the L2 consensus is just based on proof of stake instead. In theory, I don't see any problem.
Well, another thing though is that the idea behind the drive chain is that the miners on L1 would be very happy to have it around because they have all the fee revenue from merge mining that they are making. So if there's absolutely zero merge mining revenue, then they would that would not be a great position for it to be in, I think, because it's all set up with the assumption that these are just giant magic money trees printing lots of money all the time for L1 miners, and that's kind of what keeps everything aligned. So again, this is like the Ethereumization of it. It's like changing all these are very like kind of simple parts of the design. People are just saying, well, what if I gave all the fees to myself? And then it's like, well, something bad would eventually happen and then no one would care.
One of the
Whereas
things we were talking about before is just how a lot of these other chains try to do everything, and how in doing so you kind of limit yourself in certain ways.
Oh no, I'm a big believer in what I'm now calling the everything chain thesis. So I'm very much on the side of Solana and Hyperliquid, maybe to a lesser
I
extent,
suppose.
trying to do everything right now. Yeah.
Do you think that you lose any sort of granularity in what you're trying to achieve if you appeal to, like, I suppose, like the use cases of anything?
I think it's the opposite, at least from like a technical perspective, because I think that the chain, if for instance, if like a spot exchange and a perp exchange is what generates the most revenue for the chain, then security, decentralization, and scarcity being tied to the economics and fees, right? That means it actually improves those qualities over time. So I think there's like a beneficial relationship between all of these different aspects. Something that's a better money is also a better store of value, I could say as well.
So you suppose, as I understand it, then that the price going up somehow helps these functionalities, and that doing everything increases the price.
Yes, that's one way to really. There's a bit more to it, but yes, absolutely. Sure.
Because I suppose in certain cases, I think that the price just increasing can cause, I suppose, like additional issues that you see in like Bitcoin Core.
But hold on, that's not fair. That's not fair, right? Because my position is one of big blocks, speed. Let's go build products and utility. I'm a value investor, right? So my position, I went from Bitcoin to Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash to Ethereum to Solana today. So my position is more that, right?
So more, I suppose I would describe myself as anything that increases the fees necessarily being the thing which is a functionality worth adding to the chain, or a side chain or something like that. And I don't know, this is somewhat vague,
well,
but
to the chain specifically, I've also been very critical of L2s in the past. And so this conversation with Paul is I'm trying to figure out how tightly bound is it, because I like enshrined L2s. I don't like the type of L2s Ethereum did. Yeah.
And I suppose like the functionality that I'm describing that, like Ethereum is stuck with, for example, maybe this is like minutia, but when they like create an accounts-based model as opposed to UTXO, that has like consequences in terms of technically like what you're capable of doing. I think that if you have the ability to just, we're not doing the accounts model, we're doing a UTXO and it's on its own chain attached through drivechains, that gives you more functionality in the sense that, the nonce or whatever of the account doesn't prevent you from paying fees in the own currency when you're sending a tether or something like that. Like, this is an obscure example, but like, that is the type of, I suppose, like specificity I think you maybe lose out, is like applications that just change depending on the protocol that as implemented, that you don't seem to be limited at all through the method of drivechains as a scaling method. So I don't know, I suppose, what is the scaling method you see as being like superior in some ways?
Well, I think right now the winner is a kind of the pedal to the middle, what I would call like a pure parallelized approach to scaling. So it's very focused on just parallelizing the workload as much as possible, and through that we're achieving 10 to 40,000 TPS. But it's actually a trade-off if you compare that to modern sharded systems, because sharded systems can achieve potentially even over a million TPS, but the trade-off is speed. So a sharded system can maybe, if there's multiple hops, then there's actually a delay for each hop for inter-shard communication. In the case of something like Near, at least, or otherwise they just need to keep the. So it's more limited. So say about 600 milliseconds. So it turns out that actually the vast majority of usage is now on purely parallelized blockchains, and these have max capacities currently of like 10 to 40,000 TPS, but they're working on pushing that significantly in other ways, which is going to be interesting to see. But there the cutting edge is really 400 milliseconds to about 200 milliseconds. And then the next generation, we're going to see about 150.
Yeah,
it's actually pushing beyond light speed globally, but that's because of multi-leader architectures. So that to me is the cutting edge today.
I suppose, yeah, this is the argument of like, is there a value to decentralization itself? Because I think at the limit, it just becomes sort of, you have like a Chaumian mint or just like a centralized exchange.
But here's the thing. I would argue that Solana today is more decentralized than Bitcoin. I can actually argue that across basically all metrics at this stage.
I suppose, regardless of if Solana is more decentralized, I suppose like in how it is operating, it's fundamentally just different architecturally.
How so? Oh yeah, it's architecturally different for sure.
Yeah. So I suppose I think that you can further Solana just by making it even more decentralized, more centralized in whatever the spectrum is, wherever it falls. There is just a way in which it sort of like fails to seemingly like eagle. There's something that just is like literally a server.
Sorry, I missed that last part.
Well, just I think like in terms of like the complexity of just like operating it, like I think you lose out to just something that is just one server. To like Solana loses out to that and is currently just sort of doing like regulatory arbitrage.
It's because people do value decentralization and neutrality and censorship resistance. But it would also be good if it's a far more competitive version of that. And that's what this is. And also the gap is not that big anymore. Hyperliquid is seriously competing with stock markets today on commodities. It's fascinating to watch.
I suppose, how much of that do you think
I have a question, actually.
You go for it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Well, my question is about like.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
My question is about how you measure decentralization, because I was always very happy with the definition of how much it costs to spin up a new full node. And it is still easier to spin up a new full node of Bitcoin Core than Solana.
I'm sorry.
I was always happy. This is the definition that I proposed. But anyway, so I was just wondering what your.
With that definition.
I think it's regulatory arbitrage is the definition. So they're like.
Actually, I have a really interesting way to challenge that definition. Paul, what is more decentralized? 100 Raspberry Pis, right, run out of hardcore cypherpunks basements, okay, or 10,000 high-powered validators run out of data centers? What is more decentralized?
Well, I don't know, because when I wrote my essay measuring decentralization, I was trying to figure out like what does it mean to have, because of course there are many different ways of making something decentralized, and this is in a bad way because it doesn't help us define the term. So like, but usually when people like when you say like, okay, something's decentralized, they're talking about like, okay, chess is, because you can't just change the rules to chess. You could declare something, but chess is already out there and people can do it kind of without you. So they're going to just keep playing the old version of chess, you know, and it's kind of like English language. Yeah, you could declare something. You could say like looks maxing isn't a word.
Okay, hold on. Let's
I
break it
think
down a little bit.
One second.
Okay, go ahead.
Can I try to answer it? Because I think that here the constraints actually are something that help further it. So even though in your example the 10,000 servers are going to be superior to the 100,000 Raspberry Pis, it's a lot more difficult to write the software, and it's better software on the 10,000 Raspberry Pis than it is the 1,000 servers. And I think that is the value you're kind of lacking, is just the quality of the code itself will probably be better if it's actually running on this network of 100,000 Pis.
Versus 10,000 professionals, high-powered professionals.
10,000 servers. I think it's like, let's say it is
high-powered validators. That means like usually really big companies and organizations and professionals.
Right. It's a lot easier to run like bad software in that environment than it is on a Raspberry Pi in a you know,
it would
amateur.
be distributed, right? There'd be 10,000 individual validators, right?
Right, and it's really easy for them to just have a lot of like built up nonsense and garbage, in my opinion, than it is if you have to like really care about the efficiency.
But what we see in like high-powered networks such as Solana, which has multiple clients competing with each other, is they really, really care about the bottom line, which is cutting out all the garbage is actually how you get 400 milliseconds.
But it's like not able to fail. Sorry, I didn't mean to overtalk you, but it's not able to fail. Like it, and that's not necessarily good, in my opinion. Like you want anti-fragile systems, not necessarily like the best systems. And I think you lose some of that anti-fragility if you don't have the 100,000.
In my view, you don't. In my view, in the best system, you don't lose the anti-fragility, right? I'm not really arguing that's the trade-off here. And that's why maybe I would love to continue with Paul, this definition thing. The decentralization. And look,
yes.
I agree. The semantics of it is kind of hilarious because in my view, decentralization is like a spectrum, and it's actually a spectrum made up of multiple factors, right? That's like, and then you kind of combine.
It could be multidimensional.
You know,
I agree.
And so like, whenever we say decentralized or centralized, it's always a oversimplification. But
yeah, I always tried to avoid using it because I always tried to avoid using the whole decentralized, centralized thing because actually Satoshi doesn't mention, only it takes a long time for him to use the word decentralized. He's comparing like Napster to like whatever, like BitTorrent or something. So in that case, it's totally unambiguous, like what he's talking about. He's talking about like there's one server, there's one, but in the white paper and all the other stuff, he says peer-to-peer. And that also has an unambiguous meaning, which is to say that all the, which is something you don't have in Solana necessarily, but you have but maybe it doesn't matter. But the point is, in Bitcoin, you run the node, and your node is exactly the same as Satoshi's node. They're indistinguishable. So in that case, it was always totally clear.
Satoshi had a lot more mining power behind him, so you've been ant compared to Satoshi.
Well, this is like the Bitcoin SV world. Yeah, because I think they're actually all very different things. So to me, but yeah, I recognize that people have very different conceptions how this all works.
My definition, my perspective, how it comes. I think.
Well, let me ask you this about the mining question. Unless you want to. Okay, we can go back.
Yeah, I think it's the distribution of power.
Okay, the mining thing. How do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know how much hash rate a node has, because actually the hash rate is something that is like experienced over time, and it's not like if you have like a V8 engine, you have a certain amount of horsepower, or you could have like a steam engine, like a certain number of, you have like a kilowatt hour. These are like inherent properties of something, but like an ASIC could have a certain amount of hash power, but then you can point the ASIC at a different node, or you can point it at a node that's actually free riding off someone else's node, and then which node actually quote has unquote the hash power. So I always thought the hash power thing was like a big red herring, and I thought it was unrelated to decentralization.
I agree with you, actually. Like, because I think my definition, my perspective, to sum it up very simply, it's the measurement of the distribution of power, which is distribution of power. That's how I would very simply define what is decentralization. And I will say decentralization is important. It is somewhat what defines crypto and why it's interesting. And for me, I also very much view it as kind of an evolution of certain like political ideas as well, right? In terms of like this, it's in many ways an evolution of the a separation of powers, right? If you really think about it, so I think there's a lot of benefits to that. So
it's a shield against tyranny.
Yeah, and I think there's
in addition to being like
sorry. So I agree. Actually, I like those definitions as well a lot. But so for me, the answer is it's 10,000 high-powered validators, because that's more distributed, right? And that's harder to take down for some adversary to take down, I would argue. But that's affected by like how I'm defining this, but also like how we look at decentralization. We can look at like the Nakamoto coefficient, like what is the weakest point of attack in terms of number of participants to collude in order to take down the system, right? We can look at like governance. We can look at like validator counts / block producers in the context of proof of work, right? We can look at all of these different things. I don't really count node requirements, because I actually think there's a balancing act between making the network useful so that people actually have a reason to run a node, or in what I think is more important, a validator.
Well, I definitely think that what you could do is you could break it down into sub components. Mm-hmm. So you and I could agree that there is something such as the cost of running a full node, and that kind of like other things being equal, it would be better if it were lower.
Oh, it's always better
if you could actually do the exact thing. Yeah. If you could actually process the same throughput and it's all the rest was the same. So that would be kind of like, that was kind of like what I latched onto. It's ironic that after doing that, I was like, okay, I was immediately after defining that, I basically came up with drivechain, and I was like, oh, you can have the small blockers and the large blockers can just both get what they want. But of course, as you know perfectly well, Justin, some of these small blockers are just weirdo, crazy people who just, what they really wanted was to like run the project into the ground, or just for their own benefit or something. So they were like kind of bizarre. And so they didn't placate them at all, this idea that, oh, we just have the L2 be detached from the cost of running the L1 node, and now it doesn't affect. I still wonder to this day, I don't even know if certain people even like understand. Like Peter Todd has like a bizarre view that it's like if any miner anywhere could be tempted to run the L2 node for any reason, either because it produces so much money that it's the temptation to run the node is overwhelming, or that it costs so much that running the node would be like really, really inconvenient and put them out of business. He has this bizarre like view where it's like it doesn't even matter which of those two it is. In either way, that proves that the L2 is bad. It doesn't make any sense to me. I can't make any sense of it at all. I think it's just nonsensical. So it's kind of neat that I came up with this version, and then you could immediately invent drivechain, which supposedly worked for everyone, although not in practice because people don't know what they want. But
well, I mean,
but anyway, yeah.
There's this thing similarity you can draw with like L2s in Ethereum, because they do like bid for space in terms of block availability on their data availability layer that they built up out for that. Right. So, I mean, I think that's a little bit comparable to what's happening here as well. No? At least on that aspect.
And I would also agree that like there's other ways, like there's like a way of being physically decentralized. There's like, there's like the Pentagon, there's like Washington, D.C., and then there's like the Pentagon. and then there's like the Kremlin and Moscow, and then there's like the actual U.S. Army is like spread out.
Yeah.
So these are like all kinds of ways.
I think at a certain point, I think 40% of the validator power was like in a data center, not far from where I lived here for Solana. This was a few years ago, but we were joking if someone bombed it, it would be bad.
Yeah, someone told me in like 2022, they said there's actually only like 3 Solana nodes. But to their credit, the Solana people, they put in a lot of hard work and they hired a lot of like PhDs, and they put in a lot of effort to make it easier to run a node. And the technology improved, and so now it only costs like $16,000. This is not the metric that you even care about, and now they got it down from like very, very high to like $16,000 a year or something to run the Solana node, which is, I think that's very impressive.
Oh yeah, I think you're referring to Mithra, that implementation, right? Is that Mithra or? But
I don't know the names.
Solana having 3 validators in 22, that's just completely incorrect. I think it had around 3,000 around that day, maybe a bit less.
That's
yeah.
Sorry, no, I was just saying, like, I don't know if like having like PhDs be working on the L1 node is really what you want. You ideally,
which is not a good thing. I actually agree with that 100%. That's usually in my experience, a terrible thing in crypto. I was going to point it out, but I'm glad you did, JK. I wasn't going to. But
ideally, you'd have those people or whatever money is being spent, usually by some foundation, go towards like uses, like of users and things like that on a sidechain.
Or paying the developers to actually like do developers that can actually pull it off to go do it. Or other organizations as well. The cool thing is when you have multiple clients racing to all kind of
exactly
do the cutting edge, and these are usually not PhDs. PhDs usually spend more time writing papers, right? than they do building things.
It's true that competition is in favor of competition. So
yeah.
We only have 3 minutes left, unfortunately. So I don't know if anyone had anything they really wanted to say. Jump up now, quick.
I guess, what type of DeFi are you hoping exists in this world, Paul? Anything in particular?
Asking about me, I kind of think, okay, so obviously I like prediction markets. I don't know. I think if it's really true that there are like redeemable, like you have the USDT, and if it's really the case that people are making other kinds of redeemable stuff, and there's this huge amounts of trading volumes, and that then we should do it. One of the cool things about prediction market is the product is information, so it's kind of like you can actually settle it all on chain without like someone having to ship a giant container of gold or whatever, like 10,000 pounds of copper or whatever it is. So that seems like a horrible complication that I would never want to like get involved with.
How does like how does like Truthcoin benefit from being like really well capitalized then, like if it is successful?
Well, when you mean capitalized, like I would say I think there's a lot of markets that, so first of all, I am in favor of other things. Like I do think people should have like digital property. I think it's not the worst thing that people have these ordinals and these like digital stock and bonds. I think that's not the worst thing in the world. And I think, of course, the names we already discussed, owning a name. But for prediction markets, I do think there are a lot that have been totally, I've been writing about this for like 10 years. Even Calcium and Polymarket, they're not doing what I always suggested year after year, which is that you have these hybrid conditional markets where you say like, okay, who's going to win the World Cup if they fire their head coach tomorrow? And then you have like parallel realities. And this is what I was always saying. What if the Fed cuts rates, what would inflation be? If we fired the CEO, what would the stock price be? If the Republicans lose power in 2028, what will GDP be? That's what I was always saying everyone should do. And people still haven't done it. So I think that's totally big. And, if people can just look into what I've written about that, and hopefully they get excited about it in this similar way that I am.
Do you see at all like any aspects of like just like highly liquid trading markets or like in DeFi that kind of emulate any of those same benefits, or is it like, do you think totally orthogonal?
Well, I don't want people to get discouraged. And I am a pluralist, and I think, if that's what floats your boat, then great. But yeah, I could never really see a lot of value in the Ethereum DeFi. I liked that it was, it was unconstrained. Like, it was kind of like ordinals, where I was like, okay, I'm happy that people are doing it. I'm happy that fees are being paid. I'm happy that we have real users. But ultimately, it is just like buying a dollar bill with a weird serial number. And ultimately, it wasn't like long lived. I would rather have, like stuff where you could eventually have like a whole industry of people whose full-time job is to bet on, okay, this type of trade where, it's very, very, very high information, where it's kind of saying like, okay, if the, Democratic Party takes power and there's higher than expected inflation and the Federal Reserve chair is replaced and they cut interest rates and the velocity of money is this, then what is GDP? You have like this like extremely complicated situation where any traders, they may or may not have PhDs and they may or may not write papers in their spare time. But anyone, that's part of the benefit of this prediction market thing, is that anyone could then do what the FOMC does. They can just say like, okay, you can read about the details. It's kind of like, it's a lot to explain. And it's 401. So, but yeah, I don't, the Ethereum stuff seemed like a solution in search of a problem to me. And it seemed almost as like they were desperate to show, well, some stuff can happen over here in Ethereum, whereas Bitcoin just does payments. But we talked earlier how it's like ironic that now everyone thinks the grass is greener.
You should definitely
So
check
I
out
don't know if that was a real answer.
There's some crazy activity happening there.
I will check it out.
It was a real pleasure chatting with you, Paul, as always.
Really good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And nice talking to you as always. Thank you very much for stopping by.
Goodbye.
And stop back again. We try to hang out on Wednesdays usually.
Awesome.
But we'll see.
I'll see. But I really appreciate
and
it.
so thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, same here. So we'll have to end it now. As always, we end it just as it gets going. But that's just how it is. So I'll see everyone next week. And thanks very much for joining. And I hope you all enjoy listening to the recording, and see you on YouTube and etc. So till next time, goodbye.